Hi, I've been teaching psychology as an assistant professor for around 5 years in India. But my real tryst with teaching began as a 6th grade student when I was 10 years old while I was a student at a boarding school called St. Paul's School in Darjeeling. Just to give you some context, St. Paul's is almost 200 years old. And for every new visitor who walks into the school, they feel like they are at Hogwarts because the teachers are all walking in suits and they have their academic gowns. The buildings are built out of massive stones and the roofing is all picketed. It also has a massive sprawling campus. You might have seen the school if you watched Bollywood movies such as Meuna or Barfi, both of which have been partly shot there. Now, in a boarding school, generally the concept of taking tuitions doesn't exist. So the students depend on one another in order to advance their learning during their self-study hours, or what we in school used to call as the prep time. This is the classic application of Vygotsky's concept of the more knowledgeable other, also referred to as MKO. And during the exam week, I was one of the many MKOs. For 7 years in school, I taught every subject possible, with the exception of Hindi, which I was abysmally bad at. I taught math, I taught geography, I taught physics, accountancy, economics, and even literature. And literature is something that I don't understand till this date. But having taught it, I feel that all of this experience that I had in school for those 7 years is invaluable to me in terms of the academician and the teacher that I am today. All of this has contributed greatly to me being able to teach competently. And after 5 years of teaching, I also must admit that teaching inside the classroom is probably the easiest aspect of being a teacher, because there are so many other nuanced and subtle facets that go into teaching. And I was to discover this truth quite quickly, actually, because I was fresh out of masters when I got my first job. It had been just a month between the transition from a master's graduate to an assistant professor. And on my first day, I walked into this class full of enthusiasm and idealism of wanting to make a change and change the world. And in the first 10 minutes, I was met with the unkind realization that this is not as rosy as I thought it would be. Not because teaching is not great, but because there are other facets inside the classroom. I'll just give you an instance. On that first day, I turned around to the blackboard and I was drawing the structure of personality in the shape of an iceberg given by Freud. And I heard a boy snigger to his friend behind me and verbally direct an abuse at me. It was meant to be a whisper, a quiet giggle that you do between your friends, but as happens often, we murmur a little too loudly, and in this case, for that student, unfortunately, everybody in class heard it, including me. And now I was on the spot because I had to react. I felt like an eternity was passing between me turning around and talking to my students, but which is just actually a fraction of a second. And in this time, my mind went through a cascade of scenarios of my time as a student, which was a month ago. There were moments of disrespect that took place inside a classroom that I was reliving, and the cruel realization that now I was on the other side. But thankfully for me, my experiences in boarding school had prepared me for this event, because there was an extraordinary event that took place in school when I was in the 11th standard. Because when I was in the 11th standard, a friend of mine was suspended by the school authorities because he lost his temper and he hit another student. Now, something like that is not acceptable, and therefore the judgment of suspension was passed by the rector. But the rector, after passing that judgment, got up from his chair, walked to my friend and just hugged him. They hugged for, I think, a good 10 minutes. And both of them were crying by the end of it. And the rector told my friend, I know you lost your temper and I know you are full of remorse for what happened, but I know that you will come out of this better and more in control. And that makes me happy for you. This suspension is just a blip in your journey. Do not let it define you. I know you will make me a proud teacher one day, so just go and come back a better person. Now, this was the kind of thing that inspired me, that would have inspired anybody, I think, and probably has played a great role in me becoming a teacher and wanting to inspire my students to do better than they are. And unfortunately for me, or rather fortunately, on that first day, I was faced with a similar situation where I was abused by a student. He didn't mean to abuse me directly. It was supposed to be a passing phrase, I think, but I heard it, and I had two options in front of me. One, to take him to the principal, scold him, get him suspended, or to follow the lead of my rector. I chose the latter, and I think I will always continue to choose the latter. So I looked at my student and I said, why did you feel the need to abuse me? And he said, so I didn't abuse you. And I said, everybody here heard it. and I'm not going to punish you for this. I'm not even angry at you, because you abusing me doesn't mean I have to take it personally. I don't need to feel disrespected. All I want is for you to grow out of this. So maybe you can think of a reason why you felt the need to abuse me, instead of, denying the charge. And then he just began looking down, which was sort of him telling, that accepting his mistake. And I said, it was a mistake. I understand it was a mistake, and it was meant to be a whisper. It came out a little too loudly, and here we are. I'm on the spot. But I want you to take this as an opportunity to introspect, right? Think of why you found it necessary to abuse a stranger, especially since this is the first time you and I have met. But anyway, now it's your choice. You can go to the washroom, wash your face, come back and sit down, or you can choose to sit out for this 1 hour and come back next week. We have work to do. We have things to learn. And that was that. The matter was over. I had dealt with it. But when I reached home that day, I felt utterly incompetent, because I had walked into a classroom thinking I will educate people and I will make a difference in the world. I was forewarned quite rightly by some of my teachers, saying that it won't be easy, and that sometimes students might act smart, but nobody had told me that something could be this extreme. Nobody had told me that I'd have to face something like this. But that made me think of something else altogether. Why was I not trained for this? Why wasn't I prepared for it? I knew how to teach, but why wasn't I prepared for anything else? Why was I not required to complete a certification program to teach? And as time passed, I began to realize that there is more to this profession in terms of building courses, developing assignments, having evaluation rubrics, all of which is very scientifically created and researched. And yet, we do not have proper certifications as qualifications to teach. I was even building an entire master's program for a university with my colleagues with zero training on the methodology. And over the years, I've spoken to enough first-time faculties to know that they share similar trepidations. And what makes it worse is that this isn't limited to India. This is true for most places in the world, where people become lecturers in higher education institutions, they have a PhD and they have some experience as teaching assistants, and then they are expected to do a great job inside a classroom. They do have experiential learning, no doubt about it, but where is the theoretical foundation that's required? Why isn't it necessary for people who are being trusted to educate young people to have one simple 1-year degree in education? In India, to teach in high school you need a B.Ed, but in higher education you don't even need a PhD. You need to give one exam, that is NET, which has 5 questions about teaching aptitude out of 150 questions, and if you pass that, hurrah, congratulations, you're competent to be a educator. And this feeling of incompetency, I reacted in the best way that I could. I delved into literature on education, teaching and learning, and student engagement. And as I read more about them, I began to see the wisdom of the ways in which I was educated back at St. Paul's. I'm sure the 200 years of history played a massive role in the development of traditions that helped to educate us in multiple ways, especially outside the classroom. Things like positive teacher-student relationships were always encouraged. They knew that this sort of relationship builds affinity, and a continuous interest in the student's life will predispose them to be attentive in class. And if they just do it just because they don't want to disappoint you, that's good enough. At St. Paul's, we were allowed to discuss our teenage issues with our teachers. The teachers worked as proxy parents for us, and they did this outside their class time. They did this on their own time. And this was because we lived together. We grew up as a family. Of course, there were the teachers who were unapproachable, and there were some who played favorites, and just a bunch of them whom you couldn't talk to. But they were the exception. They were not the norm. And they recognized that we were kids who were still growing up, and they needed to provide us that sort of scaffolding. Although we did think that we were big boys then, but to be very honest, now that I look back, I just realized that I wasn't. Actually, none of us were. And the fact that they showed interest was important to us. I remember when I was struggling with economics early in my 11th grade, Mr. Mandal spent extra time with me when he could have been home with his family, just so that I could understand what fiscal policy really is. And there is enough consensus in research to tell us that if the teacher-student relationship is solid, then the learning will always advance. And now as a faculty at a university, I try to build the same kind of personal relationships, although it's slightly difficult because we don't share the same campus, and the students that I teach are obviously older, but by no means have they fully figured out their lives, and that is where I try to help them. One of the things I like doing inside a classroom is to walk around, if there are like 5 minutes left of my class, I like to walk around the class and just make conversation with everyone who's willing to. I want to know about their dreams, I want to know what their goals are, I want to know where they come from. I tell them where I come from, what my dreams were. I ask them what they're watching on Netflix, and why they have not sent me a request on Instagram yet. And by the way, Instagram is a fantastic place if you want to know what the young people are up to. And I usually also pay special attention to kids who don't seem to have too many friends inside the class, or they feel isolated inside the classroom. Because who could understand what loneliness is better than a 10-year-old kid who found himself all alone at night in a dormitory full of strangers, right? And this sort of thing is very important, because what I do with these kids is I shift their places, something that is permitted in Indian higher education. I shift their places and I make them sit with kids who are kind, who are warm, and generally very talkative, because it might create space for some innocuous interactions to take place that may build peer relationships, which is equally important in terms of educating young people. My students appreciate this immensely, and they have told me so multiple times that they feel like paying attention in my classes because I show an interest in their lives. It has now come to a point where these people who I've taught 5 years ago will message me about life events that take place. Things like when they're getting married, when they're trying to apply for universities abroad, they'll ask me to appraise university courses, and so on and so forth. Some of them even update me on the latest millennial term going around. The last one I heard was called Stan, which was basically someone who's a massive fan of yours. So it's quite interesting. This sort of relationship builds a human aspect to education. So in that sense, I've always seen my role as an assistant professor from a slightly broader perspective of that of an educator, or more of a holistic educator. This is what my university also has as one of its major goals. The greatest impact from St. Paul's for me comes from the school's motto, which is Moniti Meliora Sequamur, meaning having been advised, we follow higher things. And for me, there couldn't be a better way to live. And I try to inculcate this in everything I do as an educator. For instance, I remember when I was having coffee with a colleague a year ago, and we were sitting and we were just discussing about, is this all we're going to do? Is this all that students will come year after year? We will go into classrooms and we'll talk about the same old theories which are 100 years old given by Freud, and they will get educated and they will leave. Is this all that we're going to do for the next 30-40 years? And then he said, no, there is research that is exciting. I said, research is exciting, but research is not inside the classroom. Like, you're not collecting data or analyzing anything or writing anything inside the classroom. You're teaching still. Don't you feel stagnated? And then he concurred. He said, yeah, I do feel stagnated. He was teaching for 6 years at this point. So we figured that maybe we try and do something else. Maybe we go and try and educate a larger corpus of people. And then we thought the best way to do this was through social media and educational technology. So we tried to basically maximize our capabilities as educators. And this was before the pandemic came in. So the first thing we did was we learned how to code. We were 2 psychology students with no knowledge of coding, but we learned how to code. We built the Summarizing Psychology app and the UGC NET Preparation app, and an app to learn SPSS. And then a few months later, we realized that this is still slightly hands-off. It's still information being given to only psychology students. We need to inform more people about different concepts. So to disseminate information in a clear and easy way, we built the One Stop Psychology podcast and an Instagram page, which today has close to 8,500 followers and 2,500 listeners on our podcast. And the two of us weren't very interested in social media. We weren't active on Instagram until then. And this is a big badge of honor for both of us, seeing that our content is being appreciated. This also had a cascading effect on my students who saw me doing so much with my life. And then they approached me and said, "Sir, why don't we talk about football? One of the things in India that is missing is a decent podcast on football." I was initially very hesitant about this because as a professor, I'm supposed to live through this certain amount of dignity, and football fans are full of banter. So I didn't know how I could mix that. But then they said, why do you want to be so restricted? You are passionate, you love the game, why not talk about it? And because they knew me well, they said, you think Richard Feynman would have rejected something like this? And that was that. Feynman is the inspiration for my teaching life, and I knew he wouldn't reject such a chance. So having been advised, I said, yes, why not? And just like that, the Talking Barefoot podcast was born. The Talking Barefoot in that name is a play on the fact that India played the 1948 Summer Olympics barefoot. And in my pursuit of broadening my horizons, I keep seeing my students trying to do new things. I've seen some of them come with new TikTok videos, and they are on Reels, and they're on YouTube. And all of this is a work of hard work at the end of it. I've even tried to write a novel, which I've finished recently, which is inspired by my life as a boarder in St. Paul's, called Homeward Bound. Now, the truth is that I'm not nearly as successful as it might sound. It might seem like, wow, he's doing so many things. It is true, but it doesn't mean all of these things are doing well. But that doesn't stop me. That doesn't dampen my spirits at all. All I can do, I know, is try. I think that's really all that all of us can ever do. To give our passions and dreams some flight. I love teaching, and that's my primary identity. I'm inspired every day to get up and be a professor, but I refuse to just be defined by it. And that's my message to you. Refuse to stand still, because legacies aren't built that way. Take a risk, give yourself a chance, and nearly everything is possible if you're slightly brave. Or as Feynman would have said, nearly everything is really interesting if you go into it deeply enough. Thank you.